start with, I guess, because people are expecting this. A few hours ago, the news was delivered that Alexei Navalny is dead, and this is according to Reuters, that he was reportedly felt unwell and immediately lost conscious, and that was provided by the Russian prison service. Scott, since I have to admit to my audience here and to you, I was not following the story of Navalny closely at all. I was not into politics that much at that time. So I would like to ask you, what is the story with Navalny and your take on this situation now in Russia?
Well, first of all, let's just start off with the loss of life is always a tragedy. And whatever I think of Alexei Navalny as a person, what I think of his activities is irrelevant. He has a wife who's mourning his death, and he has children who are mourning his death. So let's just be straight up and acknowledge that this is, for some people, a human tragedy. But we also have to acknowledge that this is not a good man. And I know my wife always tells me never speak ill of the dead. And so, but if I follow that guidance, then we don't have much of a conversation right now. So, honey, if you're watching, I apologize, but my wife and I had this conversation this morning on the way to work. Alexei Navalny was a traitor to Russia, straight up traitor. Now he's the byproduct of a category of Russians who, he was 47 years old. So in the 1990s, this is when he was raised. This is where he came into adulthood. And Russia at that time was fundamentally broken, a fundamentally broken state. The collapse of the Soviet Union, many Russians no longer identified in the classic sense as Russians. They were confused, they were bitter, and they looked to the West for their solutions. They were enthralled with the West, and also many Russians fell into very xenophobic, racist, ways of thinking. Alexei Navalny was a racist. He's a white supremacist, straight up. Look, my wife is Georgian. He called Georgians cockroaches. He called them bugs. He did an infamous commercial talking about how to, when you get an infestation of cockroaches and flies, you use slippers and fly swatters. But he said, there's some that are big. How do you handle it? And then he shoots them. And he says, I prefer a handgun. He shot a Chechen. I mean, that was the whole idea, is he shot a Muslim. So he's basically saying that the Muslim infestation in Russia needed to be handled by Russians with handguns. This is a disgusting human being, a disgusting human being. Now, he got, caught up in the investigation of corruption. And I'll tell you what, investigating corruption was, it's a business back then, because Russia was corrupt. Let's not pretend otherwise. Russia in the 1990s was a thoroughly corrupt nation, thoroughly corrupt society. And the Russian government was open to these kind of accusations. But he didn't do this because he wanted to help Russia. He did this because he hated Russia, and he loved or at least he proclaimed his love for the West. He's one of those category of Russians that basically said, I identify more with the West than I do with Mother Russia, because he didn't know what Mother Russia was. Go ahead.
So, just using my sense here, was he a CIA agent?
Well, I'm getting to that. Back when, he was doing this work, and a lot of his funding came from non-governmental organizations, NGOs, which are fronts. In Russia, they were especially fronts for U.S. and British intelligence activity, who funneled money through these non-governmental organizations as a mechanism of achieving control in Russia. They went in under the disguise of promoting democracy, but American democracy, when we promote democracy, it's never about democracy, it's about control. How do we control? And one of the ways they controlled was to look at the media and talk about, how we have accuracy, how we fight disinformation, how we promote, quality journalism and things of that nature. But then they also, anti-corruption is a big one, because anti-corruption allows you to create an us versus them mentality that then can be exploited by media control. And the whole idea is to shape the minds of a targeted audience. And Navalny became a tool of this. His anti-corruption campaigns were publicized by non-governmental organizations who were paid by the CIA and British intelligence to generate storylines that were anti-Russian, especially after the fall of Boris Yeltsin and the rise of Vladimir Putin. The goal of the CIA and the MI6, or the Secret Intelligence Service, was to take down Putin, to bring him down. And they were doing that by trying to build up a political opposition. And Navalny was a player in this. Back at that time, the lead guy was Nemtsov. He was Boris Nemtsov, a Yeltsin insider who was positioning himself to be, the lead opposition to Vladimir Putin. Nemtsov was later assassinated in Moscow by Chechens who were arrested and convicted of that crime. But the thing about Navalny is he rose to the attention of the United States, and he basically was selected to go to Yale as part of one of these young people of prominence programs. It was an internship to Yale where he would go there, participate in seminars, and then receive an education, etc. But the thing about this is he was groomed by the U.S. Embassy. Michael McFaul was the ambassador. I'll tell you how I know I hit a nerve with Michael McFaul, because I told him straight up. I said, Michael McFaul, you know what you did with Navalny. You groomed him. The CIA groomed him. The CIA brought a package to you and said, here, we need you to sign off on this application to Yale, because we've got to send our boy there to get more specific training. And McFaul, of course, did it. And as soon as I hit McFaul with that fact, he blocked me because he didn't want to talk about it, because he knows it. He said, I didn't know Navalny. I said, you knew him very well. You met with him often. You signed off on the paperwork that sent him to Yale. Block. When he got to Yale, and I'm writing an article about this, so I don't want to give away too much to the article, but if you take a look at the Yale website, you'll notice that there's a coordinator for the particular class. Read his biography. Intelligence officer. He's a groomer. That's what he does. That's his whole program. This whole program is about picking leaders from around the world, bringing them to the United States, to Yale, and skull and crossbones. The Yale connection to the CIA is well known. And they come in there, and you have a groomer, and his job is to facilitate the connectivity between these people. Not all pass the test. Not all are worthy of CIA attention, and the domestic CIA, offices. They're in New York City. They go to Yale. They go to Boston, to Harvard, often to meet these people. But the CIA maintains a very large and robust domestic presence, and their job is to look for people who come to the United States to see if they can recruit them. They also are used to debrief foreigners who go abroad, see things and come back. The CIA that's a voluntary program. But Navalny was brought to the United States for the specific purpose of being groomed and trained by the CIA to be returned to Russia, where he would become an opposition figure that the CIA and British intelligence would fund for the purpose of bringing down Vladimir Putin. Straight up, that's all he existed for. And if you're an American and you think that's good policy, then I guess you view this guy as a hero. I mean, hey, he's working for the team, man. He's out there doing the good stuff. But if you're a Russian, understand that he's a traitor, a straight up traitor, committed treason. And I think that's why you have the departure. Now, as an American, though, I have to ask, is this really the policy we want? Do we really want to pursue a policy of trying to bring down Russia, to alienate ourselves from Russia? Because remember, at the time that this was happening, Putin is sitting there saying, hey, we really do want to have good relations with you guys. We really do, but you're making it hard because you're trying to attack us. We know what you're doing. And Putin wasn't stupid. Putin told Clinton, he told Bush, he told Obama, we know what you're doing. We know exactly what you're doing, and we know why you're doing it. Please stop doing it, because we would actually like to be friends with the West. What Navalny was the living embodiment of the corruption of the West, how the West never intended to live in peace with Russia and was using Russia's predilection to gravitate towards the West because, like I said, in the decade of the 90s, Russia lost touch with who they are. One thing that Vladimir Putin has done in Russia over the course of the 24 years that he's been in power is to teach Russians how to fall in love with Russia again. And today, Russia is a very patriotic nation. People are embracing the Orthodox Church. People are embracing Russian culture. The new foreign policy that was published last summer talks about the unique character of Russian civilization. And the Russian people are learning to be proud of identifying as Russians. Navalny came from that generation where many Russians rejected the notion of saying, I'm a Russian. They were ashamed of being Russian, and they were trying to define themselves, in the West. And in some ways, you could say that he was, a prisoner of his times, that he was one of these, a tragic story of somebody who had lost his way. I would buy into that, except for I go back to the beginning. This is a man who called Georgians cockroaches and advocated the shooting of Chechens. He's not a good man. His soul is dark. This isn't somebody who was led astray, went down the wrong path. Look, I have friends who fall into the Navalny camp. They're not bad people. They're just confused about Russia. They have a vision of what they think Russia should be, but they don't understand that in order for Russia to go down that path, Russia has to sell out to the West. And Russia already has an experience of selling out to the West. The decade of the 1990s, the catastrophe where millions of Russians died because of the West's indifference towards Russia. I try to tell every Russian that sadly, the West collectively doesn't like you. They don't care about you. And they will do harm to you if you let them. That the best defense for Russia is to be Russian, to say, no, we're good people. We have good culture. We love who we are. And if Russia behaves in that manner, then they can stand up as the equals to the West and hopefully get the West to realize the errors of their way and for the West to start to gravitate, not to become Russia, but to say we can be friends with Russia. And of course, that's what you and I are advocating. We're not advocating becoming Russian. The last thing I could ever be is a Russian. I'm American to the core, for all the good and the bad that entails. But that doesn't mean that I can't like the Russians and I don't want to live in peace with the Russians, because I do. I like the Russians. I want to live in peace with the Russians as an American, not as a Russian. I don't want to transform into something I can never be. And this is what Russians have to understand too. You can live in peace and harmony with the West. You can like the West without becoming the West. Be proud of who you are. Navalny was a man who wasn't proud of being Russian. Navalny is a man who sold out in the worst possible way. He was a CIA asset, straight up. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's so detested and reviled in Russia. He never had more than 3 to 5% support. He was never going to be a viable opposition leader, but his job was never to win an election. His job was to destroy democracy in Russia. And I'll tell you why. Because Russia, left to its own ways, if democracy grew from the grassroots, they'd keep electing Vladimir Putin because he's a pretty damn good president who's done a good job by Russia, dragged him out of the decade of the 90s to get to Russia to where they are today. I'm sure we'll probably talk about Tucker Carlson, but Tucker Carlson is out there talking about being radicalized by Moscow. Well, yes, Tucker, Moscow's pretty cool, isn't it? It's the exact opposite of what you thought it would be based upon anti-Russian propaganda that is propagated in the United States. But I'll give you a news flash, Tucker. All of Russia is pretty cool. Moscow's not this unique bastion of culture and good living. All of Russia is pretty cool. They've got culture throughout all of Russia. All of Russia lives in a decent way. Maybe not like Moscow. Moscow's a big city, gets a lot of money. But the rest of Russia is not failing either. It's doing quite well. And I think that this is the reality that Russians have learned to appreciate, and now we have to get the West to appreciate it as well.
Thank you so much for explaining, Scott. I really appreciate. How much time do we have? Because I want to go a little bit deeper in this topic with Navalny. How much time we have?
We have till 12 noon.
So is it like 1 more hour or so?
We have
No.
30 more minutes.
Oh, okay. So I would like to know more about this, but because
But we
I have
can reschedule. We can reschedule a talk maybe
okay, okay.
maybe next
Just
week. We can do
quick
this.
question. Yes. Okay. Quick question here. The timing of his passing, did he die or he was killed? That's a different story. But the timing of it, in a month from now, we will have here in Moscow. I say we because I'm here now. I'm not Russian. I'm not voting here. I say we because I feel like I belong at this moment. Presidential election in Russia, right? So what I'm really wondering, Scott, the timing of it.
Well, the timing, first of all, because there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there who say, obviously Putin killed him because he's afraid of. Navalny had no impact on the elections. In fact, the worst thing could happen for Putin is for Navalny to die. Literally, the worst thing, because it's creating this speculation, it's creating this negativity. Why bring it on? Here's this is what happened to Navalny. He was imprisoned on corruption charges. The charges are real. In the West, they'll say it's all made up. William Browder, who himself is a very corrupt man, heritage, capital, stole money. His non-lawyer lawyer, Magnitsky, died in prison. And it led to the Magnitsky Act, which led to Magnitsky sanctions and the sanctioning of Russia, purely political. Browder will say, oh, these are trumped up charges. Well, Browder, your corruption charges aren't trumped up. You're guilty as hell. And so was Navalny. Navalny was guilty of corruption. But, he was given every chance to get the hell out of Russia. This poisoning thing. I mean, again, I don't know exactly what happened. The Russians put Novichok, the most dangerous chemical in the world. I mean, one whiff, boom, 1,000,000 people die, and they impregnated his underwear with this apparently, but it didn't kill him. So how can it be Novichok? How can it be the most dangerous poison in the world if it didn't kill him? But so some people think that it was a put on by Navalny, but the Russians were like, get the hell out of here. If you want to go, we'll let you. They had the guy dead to rights on corruption charges. He's going to go to jail. And what the Russians did is said, no, you can leave. Go to the West. And he did. What's the first thing that Navalny did when he got to the West after getting everybody to say, yes, you died of, you were poisoned with Novichok, but we're not going to release any of the evidence. We're just going to say it happened. He colluded with the CIA, a CIA production team in Germany to produce a film that exposed the corruption of Vladimir Putin. One of the things they did is talk about this giant villa in Crimea, but when it was just obviously a fake job, but that's who he is. He's a man who works with the CIA to bring down Vladimir Putin. If Navalny was smart, he would have stayed the hell out of Russia. He would have at that time just said, no. But he was cocky, and I think his handlers were cocky, and they felt, and again, this tells anybody out there, don't work with the CIA because they don't care about you. And they let him go back to Russia, believing that the trial would create political unrest. Nobody in Russia cares about this man. They all know who he is. He's a traitor, and he was guilty of sin. He went to trial, found guilty, went to prison. The prison term that he had sent him to a specific kind of prison. It's specific. You go to the prison that is based upon the charge and the time that you have. While he was in prison, additional charges came up. He came back for trial. He was found guilty, got a bigger sentence, which means his sentence now is bigger than the prison that he's in supports. So he was transferred to a more difficult. While he was in that first prison, we know that he had medical problems. He admitted, doctors came. So he was an unhealthy person already. They transferred him to this harsher regime in the Arctic Circle. And he died of bad health. Could the Russians have done something different? Sure. I mean, I would have said, I don't want this guy to die of bad health. I would have put him in a lower security prison where he could get, good medical assistance, et cetera, except this man was going to die in prison. His sentence was such that he wasn't coming home. Everybody thought that he was going to come out of this. He was going to die in prison no matter what. And so the Russians were like, well, if he's going to die in prison, why are we going to make an exception? I mean, we have good medical facilities up there, but Navalny was a man in bad health. He died of natural causes. Nobody assassinated him. The CIA didn't get into the prison thing and kill him. So this would be, it's just bad luck that Navalny died, in a month before the Russian the presidential elections. It's a tragedy again. A human being dying. Nobody wants that. But he brought it on himself. He's in prison not because he's a political prisoner. He's in prison because he's a corrupt son of a bitch. He's in prison because he got greedy, and he's lucky. And this is where the Russians were smart, because they had the goods on him. They could have charged him with espionage at any time. But here's the reason why they didn't charge him with espionage. If they accused Navalny of being a CIA agent, they would have convicted him of that charge. And now the CIA gets to come in and trade him and say, okay, we want our boy out, and we'll give you this person there. We see that. Remember, Putin had that conversation with Tucker about Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal guy. They're talking about trading, horse trade, because Evan is a CIA asset. The CIA doesn't negotiate with the Russian security services to trade somebody who's not a CIA asset. Navalny, had he been convicted on espionage charges, would have been up for being traded. Russians didn't want to trade this guy, so they convicted him on basic corruption charges. And that's what he was in jail for. And there's nothing the CIA could do. They can't come in and say, oh, that guy you have in there for corruption is really one of us. So we need him out. The Russians wanted him in prison. They just wanted him out of the way. Like I said, remember, they let him go. They said, go, get out of here. And he left. And he didn't have to come back. He could have stayed out there. But he came back because he was supposed to engage in a process, the politicization of his criminal trial, that would have, according to the West, promoted anti-Putin sentiment. It backfired because all Russians know who this man is. He's a traitor. He's not a good person. And his conviction came and went. Nobody cared. He went to prison. Nobody cared. And he died in prison. Nobody in Russia cares. Everybody that cared in Russia fled when Putin invaded Ukraine, the special military operation. Remember those 200,000 Russians that fled? They were all Navalny supporters. They were all the little people like, oh, no, we don't like Vladimir Putin. Oh, no, we're going to do this. And so they all ran away. And the Russians that stayed behind went, good riddance. Get the hell out of here. We don't want you back. Now, the vast majority of those 200,000 that fled are saying, can we come home now? Because the West sucks. And we'd really like to come back home to Russia. And, because the Russians are